Aurora, welcome to the show.
Hey, how are you? It's great
I,
to see you.
I know I'm so excited to dive into this conversation because here's the thing, right? Like public speaking to me has been such a tool for me, not only to grow my business, but to more importantly make an impact, to get my message heard, to have people be inspired or think a little bit differently or take action. And I love that, right? And I wouldn't have been able to do that if I didn't have this podcast, which led to speaking opportunities for me. And what you do is you help people formulate their message, get paid to speak, get on the stages, do all that stuff. So we're going to dive into all that stuff. But why don't we take a step back? And I want to talk about, I believe you were 14 years old the
Yeah.
first time you did some public speaking. Let's start there. What was that like? Because most 14-year-olds would literally rather jump off a cliff than speak in front of people.
Well, and I really would have rather have jumped off a cliff. If it had not been for my social studies teacher, Mr. Johnson, shout out to him, who really forced me. There was a, a speech contest that was being run by, I think, the Rotary Club, if I'm not mistaken. And you had to kind of write a little essay, and then that essay was going to jump off into this speech contest. And my essay was picked as one of the finalists to go into the contest pool. And I said, oh no, I don't want to do that. And Mr. Johnson was a very direct kind of man. He was very tall, imposing kind of presence, and really was someone who challenged his students to, to press into things that felt uncomfortable. And he basically looked at me and said, oh no, you're doing this. So I took my essay and wrote a speech and made it all the way to the finals. And it was an incredible experience. It was nerve-wracking. It was all the things, and then, put the 14-year-old overlay on top of it. It was all of those things. But I really learned through that experience, number one, the power of the person with the microphone. Because when you step on a stage and you have the microphone, all attention is on you.
Yeah.
Everyone is listening to what it is that you have to say. And I, remind people this happens anywhere. You could be in the grocery store and the grocery manager decides he's going to have a flash sale on hamburger meat and he jumps on the mic on the intercom for the store and announces it. And what does every shopper do? They stop and they listen. So public speaking is really it really is to me one of the most powerful marketing tools that you could have and for your business, for your ideas, for your message. It's just so important. And I learned that at 14.
I absolutely love that. And I remember I was around 14 the first time I spoke in front of a group of people. And it was, I'm sure it was a mess. I don't have a strong memory of it. There certainly wasn't a contest or anything, but I was representing an organization as a youth, and like I got to speak in front of a group of people, and part of me was like, oh, I really like that, but I also really hate that, like at the same time, like that whole feeling. And by the way, I still kind of have that feeling every time I talk on the stage, like, oh, I love that, but I also kind of hate that
It
because
never goes away.
yeah, you have those nerves, right? But why don't we start with the idea of like who should get on stages? Like when you look at the people you work with, like what's the ideal person or types of people that should be speaking on stages?
Well, I'm gonna I'm gonna give you a kind of an idea of a list of, the types of folks it should be, but then I'm gonna just wrap it with a ribbon around. And these days, it should probably be everyone who is in any way or shape or form running a business. But public speaking is really ideal for anyone who's an expert in their field or in their subject matter. It's ideal for entrepreneurs who are looking to engage more deeply with their audience. It accelerates the whole know, like, and trust that we all know is critical in marketing. And it's really ideal for authors. And I say that for fiction and nonfiction authors. We mostly think about people who write nonfiction books, but even that fiction author can engage more deeply with their readers and build those raving fans by choosing to be a public speaker. Today in this world, we know we've got AI that's just exploding all over us, and it gets better and better every day. Every day we're seeing, things that we never thought we could have imagined with things like video and voice. And I think as that grows, and I think that it should, I'm personally excited about it. I think the world is also craving that authenticity and realness. And we deliver that when we decide to become speakers, whether we're on live stages, whether we're doing podcast interviews like this one. Everyone should be looking to present themselves as a real, genuine, authentic person, and speaking allows you to do that.
Yeah. Now imagine people come to you and there's probably two parties. The one party goes, I don't have anything to speak about. I don't know how I could stand on a stage for 30, 45, 60 minutes and give a talk. And then you have the other people who go, I have 17,000 ideas of what I want to speak about. Like, how can somebody get into a groove and really kind of sit down and figure out what is my message here? Like, how can I make the biggest impact in that room with all this information that I've collected over the years?
It's almost like you sit in on some of my sales calls, the way you've described that. So I have this theory that in a, say 30, 45, even a 1 hour presentation, even if you had a multi-day workshop, it's difficult to do more than solve one problem for your audience. And so where you really start to kind of hone in on those topics and what you should be talking about is it starts with knowing your audience really well. What are their challenges? What are the things that hang them up? What are the questions you're constantly being asked that people want an answer to? And then you pick one and you build a presentation, you build a topic around that one problem. The goal of a speaker in front of an audience is to create transformation, even in that short period of time. And if you can solve one problem for your audience, I don't care what it is. It could be doing better with, getting their dog to walk with you on a leash. It could be how to build an email list. Like if you can solve one problem for your audience in 30 to 45 minutes, I promise, one, you will have a group of people who feel incredibly empowered. And two, that audience is going to think, well, wow, if Justin could solve that problem for me in 30 minutes, what could he help me with if I bought his program or bought his book or listen to more of his podcasts or, if I engage more deeply with him, I'm just going to get more of this good stuff.
Yeah.
So when you do that for your audience, when you solve one thing, you give them that experience of what it's like to engage with you further, as opposed to trying to either shoot them down with a fire hose and tell them everything you know, then it's too much for them to consume. Or if you diminish yourself and don't even take to the stage because you can't even imagine who would want to listen.
Yeah.
Know your audience and then pick a problem and then solve it well from that for them in that 30 minutes. And I promise you'll end up with fans who want more.
Yeah, one thing I say all the time is that there's actually a statistic based off of the sheer amount of people in the world that there are 75,000 people that need to hear your message specifically from you, whatever that message is. And I always
So
and I
good.
always finish this whole story up with like how selfish of you not to share, right? Because you're meant to, obviously teach somebody something or help them through a struggle or whatever, right? Because there's different types of talks, and I don't remember all of them. I'm sure I've heard it at some point, but I know there's like instructional, inspirational, so on and so forth. Like, how do you know what kind of talk you should be giving, or how do you find out which one best fits your personality? I don't even know if that counts as a question or works as a question, but you know where I'm going with it.
Yeah, no, I definitely know where you're going with that. And I think that, again, as we get to know our audiences better, we can define and identify what their different needs and challenges are. And sometimes they've got a problem that they need solved. Like we're going to take them through something that's educational and give them a tactical experience, right? Other times that same audience is like, I work with speakers. They need to be motivated to get out there and jump on that stage and be able and recognize that they have the ability to provide transformation for others. So in that sense, like I still am a speaker coach, but here I am showing up as a motivator, as someone to inspire. Keep digging into those needs and then pick the different types of presentations that are going to meet those needs. Um, it becomes really an exercise in getting to know someone well. You know, I think we certainly imagine our audience as a large group of people, and for a lot of us, it's a large group of people. But I think it's important to almost to identify like a person. Who's this person? And on any given day, you and I both know this, we work with people that on any given day, yeah, they need our advice, but someday they just need a pep talk.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, that you can do this. And sometimes some of our presentations need to be really well thought out pep talks, inspirational messages that are going to move people forward, get them up out of their seat and reminding them who they are and what they're capable of and that they can do it. It all boils down to the same point. What does the audience need and when do they need it?
So how many different keynotes should a speaker have? Like how many different avenues should somebody go down? Because I've been asked to speak on so many different topics, and I usually just kind of lend them into like, no, I'd rather talk about this, which is like my sweet spot, right? But
Right.
I know somebody who's like a full-time speaker, somebody who does it more often than me. I do about one thing a month, right? But
Mhm.
somebody who does it even more, they have a whole entire tool belt. Like, how many do you suggest somebody has? And do they fall under those different categories? Like, hey, here's an instructional one, here's a little bit motivational. Like, how do you teach people or walk people through that kind of thought process?
Yeah, for people who are, wanting to go down that road of, I mean, I think we're all professional speakers, but where speaking is like this really deep, meaningful revenue stream for their business, you probably are going to want to have anywhere from 3 to 4 of like keynote speeches, presentations that you can give that fall into these different categories so that you have a menu of things that people can choose from, one, and two, you give them a reason to invite you back. If you do really well with that first presentation, they're going to want to have you back and they're not going to want to hear the same presentation. They're going to want something new. But the reason that I like that number to be kept small is that for most of us, we want to develop a comfort level with the content. We want to be able to get up there and deliver it confidently. And when we have too many presentations, we're not giving them often enough in order for us to establish that routine, that rhythm, that finding that groove with the delivery. So if you keep the number smaller, you give yourself the chance to get more confident with your material. And then you can make decisions as your speaking business changes. Like, okay, I don't get a lot of requests for this one. I'm going to take this out. I seem to be, people kind of want this. Let me replace it with something. Or you get inspired by an idea that something with something that happens at an event and you can make changes. But I love that 3 to 4 sweet spot. And then, obviously sometimes you're going to get that special request from a dream stage.
Yeah.
And it's like, I will build whatever you would like. What would you like me to talk about? I will gladly talk about it for you. So
That's when you
that's
reach out to Aurora and say, hey, I need your help formulating this talk that I have no idea how I'm going to do it.
and that's one of my favorite things to do, really, is I think a lot of this communication stuff is so it lends itself to working with someone who can ask you great questions and act as a sounding board. So I love doing that work. It's a lot of fun. Brainstorming topic ideas is something that I really love doing.
Yeah, and it's just crazy to think like how many different avenues we when we look at public speaking now, kind of where we're at, right? You have the in person, you have virtual. There's so many different ways to go about it. Do
Yep.
you look at podcasts like this, like you're now on this podcast? Is this kind of like do you count this as a speaking opportunity, or is
I
this just a
absolutely
chat?
do. No, it's absolutely a speaking opportunity. I think one of the things that COVID did for us is expanded the view of what a stage is. Before COVID, when we talked about stages and we talked about speaking, we were primarily talking about live events. There were virtual things, but they weren't, they didn't have a level of sophistication to them. There were a lot of things that weren't true about them. But when COVID happened and everything had to go virtual, it's like, well, we developed this broader idea of what that word stages means. And we also could embrace the idea that you can build a stage for yourself. And that's what you've done, Justin. You've built this stage. And you invite other people onto it, but you could just as easily have had a podcast that's just you daily talking about growth and business opportunity. So my feeling about this is, there are definitely people in this world for whom a live stage is just never going to be comfortable for them. Like it's just not their nature, their personality. And I'm not someone who's like, nope, you got to get out there. I love it, but if it's just not you, that's fine. But in today's world, today's digital world, there is a stage for everybody. And so if live is not your thing, then maybe being a podcast guest is, or maybe hosting your own podcast hosting your own podcast show is. Find the stage that works for you and then embrace it.
Yeah, my buddy has a company called Be the Stage. And so he works
Love
with
it.
large corporations that kind of help build their own stage. He does it through podcasting or events or whatever. And he talks about how you can just literally build your own stage no matter where you're at. And I love that thought process. Now, for me, I'll take in person on a stage all day because I need some sort of reaction, right? When I'm
Mhm.
up there, I need to see it at least show me negative or positive in the audience, right? As I'm
Right.
saying stuff, smile a little bit, give a chuckle,
Yeah.
whatever. Because if I don't get that, I'm like, what's happening, right? And I remember when COVID hit, I had a number of in-person things switched to virtual.
Hmm.
And a lot of those virtual things were then pre-recorded. So it was literally me in my office, like standing, talking,
Yep.
and it's just like talking to nobody. And it was
Yeah.
a very, very strange thing. And so I
It's
think
hard.
everybody, it's really difficult, right? And I think everybody has to find their little niche. Like, what's a good way for people to kind of figure that out? Because I think if somebody's like, well, I can't do in person. Well, are you just saying that because you're afraid of it, or do you think your personality doesn't mesh? How can people find out? Do you say, go try, do it once and see what happens?
Well, I think one of the things that you have to explore is figuring out is it that you're nervous about doing it or are you afraid of doing it? Those two things are very different. Nerves are about dealing with some anxiety around the act of doing it. You're going to do it. It's just that physical feeling that comes. We talked about this. It's like you and I are both speakers. We still get a little bit of that nervousness before we get on stage. And when you're nervous, you can develop tools. You can use tools to help settle that down so that you can get on that stage and deliver a solid performance. Whereas fear is about about being concerned about the unknown, about things that you can't control. What if my equipment fails? What if I forget my place? What if the audience hates me? Like we need to be able to then deal with like, okay, what is the genesis of those fears? And how can we then implement tools and help you shift your mindset so that fear is not controlling you and you can at least attempt to get on the stage and be able to connect with an audience. So I would ask, I would encourage people to think about like, okay, am I nervous or am I afraid? And then work on developing those tools so that you can figure out what it is, what the issue is. I think everyone should at least attempt an in-person event. The first time is going to suck. You probably remember your first time. I remember my first time, well past my 14-year-old speech finalist experience. I remember in my corporate life, I worked for a big marketing PR agency, and we would have new business pitches that were in person. And I remember I would always just eat it in rehearsal. I was horrible at rehearsing.
Yeah, I am
And
too, by the way.
it's just that's the place. And if you're gonna eat it, that's the place to eat it. But I remember like, senior people wondering like, okay, is she gonna be able to do this? Because we got a lot of money riding on this presentation and she's got this piece. I was able to work out all the bugs in the rehearsal. And then once I got on stage, I was much better. But it wasn't like those first few times, they really weren't all that great. And you have to be willing to suck in order to get better. And so get the suck out of the way. Let's do the first one so that we can get out of the way and get on the road to being better.
Yeah, I recently spoke to. I just thought of this. I recently spoke to a room of high schoolers. It was like a collection of juniors and seniors from three different high schools in the
Wow.
area brought together. And let me tell you something. That was worse than virtual. They just blank stare at you. No matter what you say, you can crack a joke. There's no reaction. But then, I ended up having to leave the event. But it was like I was up on the stage and like Mike Quick, who played for the Eagles back in the '80s, he's now their radio announcer. He was one of the speakers. And so I'm like, what am I going to talk about? This guy's talking about winning Super Bowls. And I'm like, oh, hey, start a podcast and then go and inspire others. And so I was like, oh, they hated it. And then I ended up getting feedback later. Like they had sent me some stuff that the kids wrote and like they were super engaged. So sometimes you can't even pay attention to how the room is reacting. Like you might be hitting anyway. So like it's really that whole stay true to yourself. But I want to go back to the nerves before the stage.
Sure.
I always get super nervous.
Mhm.
And then what I end up doing is I have two tools that I use. One is box breathing, right? Breathe in for 4 seconds,
Mhm.
hold for 4 seconds, etc. And then I also have a mantra that I say over and over in my head that I'm super excited. I'm super excited. I'm super excited because our body's reaction to excitement and nerves is the same exact reaction. And
Right.
so if you can kind of rewire that brain. So those are the two things that I do right before I step on the stage. What do you do?
So here's how I manage nerves. I always arrive at the room that I'm going to be speaking in well ahead of the audience, like as early as I can get there. I get there in advance, and that's a good practice for any speaker. You want to see what the setup is and make sure everything's there that they said would be there. But then what I do is I make a point of going and introducing myself and personally meeting some of the early arrivals. Hi, Justin. It's nice to meet you. I'm Aurora. I'm your speaker today. I'm excited to be here. Tell me a little bit about your experience with speaking. Like, let's just have a little bit of an exchange. I always find that it's easier to speak to my friends than it is to speak to a room full of strangers. So what I do is
Mm,
I go and I make some new friends.
that's smart.
And then once I get on stage and I'm either introduced or it's time for me to start the session, is I look for my new friends and I intentionally start my presentation looking directly at them and I speak directly to them. And we're friends now, right? We had this friendly interaction. And then that usually is enough to help me get into my rhythm. And then I can start speaking to the broader room. No one else knows that I'm doing this. My new friends are just like, oh, okay, well, this is great. Nice to meet the speaker. But that's enough to help me settle down and then get into my routine and then I can move into my delivery and I'm feeling much better. So and then the other thing too is, and I always tell people this, no one shows up at to hear a speaker expecting or wanting to see a train wreck. Nobody does that. Nobody shows up in a room and says, I hope this is a disaster. I cannot wait to see the speaker eat it. Nobody does that. Your audience is for you. They came, they knew what they were going to hear. They chose your topic. They chose to come and hear you. So remember that they're for you. And even if it starts out a little bumpy, even if you have the dreaded tickle in the throat and you got to step aside and just cough it out, they are for you. They're never against you. Just go with the flow and remember that they're in your corner. They're not looking to see you bomb. They want to see you succeed.
Yeah. Have you ever heard of he's like a communications coach, I guess he calls himself. His name's Vin Zhang. Have you ever heard of
Yeah,
him?
yeah, I love his
So
energy.
yeah, so Vin was actually on this podcast. He was like episode 17, right? So you're
Wow.
going back like 9 years ago. This is before anybody knew who he was. Like he still owned his video editing company.
Right.
And he ended up coaching me for free after the call on
Wow.
public speaking. And it was really great, right? And I remember sitting down, and this is 9 years ago. By the way, there's a point to this story. Uh, Sitting down with him on these calls back to back weeks. Um, and we were literally going through how to write a 60-minute keynote, right? And like what's the formatting of it and like what should you be touching on and like all these things, right? And then as the time has passed, I feel like we've become more of an ADD society.
Mhm.
And the 60-minute keynote is being asked for less and less. As a matter of fact, I'm speaking in DC next week for 20 minutes. Every
Mhm.
speaker is 20 minutes, right? My event is 30 to 35 minutes, depending on the slot the speaker has.
Yep.
Um, Now, obviously, if I have to do 60,
Mhm.
I actually try two things. One, I say, well, nobody wants to hear somebody talk for 60 minutes except for the person talking. So how about
Right.
we do 45 and then I can do Q&A
Right.
because it helps keep attention, right?
Mhm.
But how can somebody take one talk and go, okay, now this talk, like I'm literally giving the talk that I'm giving for 35 minutes for 20 minutes, next week. So how can somebody look at that and say, how do I chop this down into smaller bite-sized pieces? Is there a format to that?
Yeah, and I'm so glad that you asked about that because I'm a big believer like of your like the talk you love the best, your signature talk. You should have whatever you decide is that full delivery of it. You need to have a 30-minute version, a 15-minute version, and a 5-minute version. And we should all be able to talk about, like, cover a piece of that topic in those blocks of time. And so I remember once being asked to cut a presentation down into 5 minutes. I used to give a talk that, basically covered the five key points in my book. And so what I did in that talk is I said, these are all of the things that you need to think about when you're putting together a great speaker proposal. Today, we're just going to focus on this one thing. And I focused on title. What you need to do as you're paring things down are what can be pared away so that I can give them something meaningful off of just one section. So let's say your presentation has three key points. And if you've got to cut it down, it's like, okay, which one of these points is going away and still gives the audience something meaningful? You got to cut it down some more. It's like, okay, which one of the two that are left is the most meaningful? Like if they don't get this, the other two don't make any difference. And you focus on that. And then give them a meaningful presentation on that one piece. We can all just keep slicing and slicing and slicing. You may touch on it, like there are these other things that you have to consider, but today we're going to focus on this thing and then narrow in on that.
I love it. So I think anybody who's thinking about getting on stages or somebody who already has a keynote and maybe have spoken once or twice, the next question is, well, how do I find more stages? How do I get on more stages? What are some tips and tricks for people to do that, right? And so like for me, I've never looked for a talk. Like I
Mhm.
talk about once a month throughout the year,
Mhm.
give or take, and it's all because of this podcast, right? Somebody being like, "Hey, I love your podcast. Will you come speak?" And
Mhm.
I'm honored every time. But I've never looked for it. So where can people go to look and try and find the right stages for them?
Yeah. So, um, again, going back to the audience, because that's who we serve. I really do believe as speakers, we're there to serve. We serve our audience from the stage. You go back to your audience and you got to go and look. Number one, where are they gathering? Where do they get together to learn, to mix and mingle, to fellowship? Like where do they go? What are the events that they attend? What are the clubs they belong to? What are the groups they're a part of? What coaching groups are they, do they, what coaches do they follow? Where are they collecting? Because where they're collecting themselves is where you want to start looking because they're going to talk about what events they're going to, what podcasts they listen to, what coaches they're following. They're going to talk about all of that. And that is how you're going to start to build your own list. Now, that's you doing your own DIY work. There are plenty of databases that you can pay to accelerate that search work. And you should, if you've got investment dollars to do that, definitely jump into that. But that's where I always like to start because they're going to tell you where they're going and where they are, and that's where you want to place yourself. So that's number one. The other thing that I always tell people is that your stages and finding them oftentimes is going to happen through your network of people, and you probably have reached this place now, Justin. You are what is probably called the referable speaker. You get opportunities from your show and people who refer you or who suggest you. You want to be able to utilize your network. Chances are very good that most of us know people who either have a stage or know people who have a stage and can make an introduction for us. Anything that you can do to fast track that know, like, and trust is great. You always need to be prospecting, cold emailing. It's a slow slog, but I'm not against it. But if you can get on a warm path with someone, that's always the better way. It just goes faster. So, one, where are your people? And two, who do you know that you could ask? I know you've got a show. Would you be interested in having me as a guest? I know you know Justin. Do you think you could make an introduction? I think I could be a good guest for him. Would you make an introduction to me? I'd love to meet him
Mm.
and follow those things. Don't be afraid to make those asks. The answer could be no, but if you never ask, it's absolutely going to be no because the answer could also be yes, and you just never know. But I'm a big believer in the network. You've got to leverage the people that you know in a way that allows you to serve well. That's the bottom line is we want to serve our audience as well.
Yeah, anybody who knows me, if somebody asked a friend or somebody who's been on the show, hey, can you introduce me to Justin to be on the show? Those people should say no. It's one of my least favorite introductions ever. But like, you
Uh,
guys want to know how to get on the show? Ran into Aurora, who I knew from before from
we've known
events.
for each other for a few years and had
Yeah,
been out of touch for a long time.
yeah, we ran into each other at Podfest. We talked smack in the hallway, and I was like, "You got to come on the show." So that's how you get on the show. Like,
So,
just
so then it boils down to like, okay, where is Justin going? Then you want to go there.
that's right. And actually, the best place is my event in April, Growth Now Summit, right? GrowthNowSummit.com. Go get your tickets. So, with that being a little plug, with that being said, I want to ask you a question that I ask every single person on the show. It's a two-part question. The
Okay.
first part is, what is your definition of success? And the second part is, what are three things you do every single day to ensure that success for yourself?
Oh, wow. Those are some great questions. So I think for me, success is about using the gifts and talents that I've been given. My faith is super important to me, and I really believe I've been given gifts and talents to serve this world in some meaningful way, and that will also allow me to build a comfortable living. And those two things coexist in the same space.
I love
So
that.
that's super important to me that every day I get a chance to serve people with the talent, the gifts and talents that I have. And I do that, every day. Like right now, I'm in a great space where I'm, serving a small group of people who are beta testing a program that I'm building. So I get to serve them. But I do that every day by making sure that I give the the impression the world might say, giving the vibe that I'm open and available. If you have a question, if you need help, if you need support, like I'm available. I want to make myself accessible. I want to make myself approachable. I don't ever want anyone to feel like, oh, she probably knows the answer, but I don't know if I can ask her. It's like, no, come ask me, DM me, call me out and tag me in a post, something, respond to an email. Like, I want people to feel like if they ask me something, if they reach out to me, that you're going to get me responding and giving you something meaningful as an answer, not just a thanks for listening or thanks for writing. It's like I'm interested and curious about the people who are interested and curious about me. And I
Mm.
try to every day just make sure that I'm giving that vibe, giving that impression, like I'm available, ask.
That's so rare these days too. So that's such a powerful thing to do, as far as making the connections that that then make that impact that you're trying to make in the world. Because so many people are they shut themselves off. They think they're too good, or hey, I get paid for that, so why would I do that, right? And so kudos to you for being that person because I think that's
Thank you.
super important. So obviously, like I told you, I have a talk next week. What's the number one piece of advice you'd give me for my talk next week?
Oh man. So I would make sure that you come in with great energy. You said, is this the talk you're going to DC about?
Yeah.
Yeah, going to DC. Okay, so there's going to be a lot of energy in the air, right? So I guess one of the things I would tell you is make sure you don't get distracted by lots of other things that are happening and stay focused on your purpose. Why are you there? That so that your audience, when they leave, they know that you were solely focused on serving them well and that they get what they needed from you. It's so easy in the world today to be pulled off track. I heard a speaker the other day make kind of a like a light joke about some of the current news events right now, and they couldn't help themselves. They ended up dragging themselves into like a 3-minute riff on
Ugh.
that current event, and I don't think that's what they intended. It's just what happened because they allowed themselves to be pulled that way. They allowed themselves to be distracted. So I love that when, especially when you've got a talk that you've delivered a number of times, and I know this is probably, you've probably, tailored it a bit, but it's a talk well. It's easy to allow yourself to like, well, let me just throw this in there. And next thing you know, you're down a rabbit trail that is not helpful and you're trying to figure out like how do I get back to the road. So that's what I would tell you, especially because you're going to be in that particular city. There's going to be lots of energy in the air around current news events. Just allow yourself to stay focused.
How'd you know that I got ADD problems?
I didn't
Because
know that.
I will literally at a talk and I'll be like, okay, I gotta go here real quick. That does happen to me. I
Yeah,
won't have the time to do that in DC because I don't have
you
whatever.
don't
Because a
have a
lot of
lot.
times I'm like,
Yeah,
I got wiggle room. I got stuff I can talk about that it usually makes sense to the topic. But like
it takes a
I'm
lot of discipline and self-control to do that. Like if you can do it and not be pulled into it, you know, good on you. I don't know that I have that for certain topics. I don't know that I could do it. So yeah,
I
focus.
love. Yeah. No, I love it. Thank you for sharing that with me. So I wrap up every single interview with the same question. But before we get there, how do
Mhm.
people get a hold of you? How can they work with you? Because obviously, I've learned so much just in this conversation. I could not imagine learning from you for 10 weeks. Like, how can people get a hold of you and start working with you?
So, yeah, so I think what I would like to offer everyone is this. I've got a great checklist for creating a speaker one sheet. It's one of my favorite giveaway tools. It's a great checklist to let you know, like, okay, if you're going to create a one sheet, and I think most people should have one. There's a lot of controversy in the speaking world, whether you need them or don't need them. I think you should have one. So if you want to go to getpicktospeak.com/checklist, you will sign up for my email list. I send great emails, by the way. And I would love to send you that checklist because I think it would be a huge help. And I think it would be a great idea starter. If you don't have a one sheet, it's going to get your wheels turning about what should be on one. And if you have one, it'll give you something great to measure yours by to see if anything's missing.
I love it. I'm definitely doing it because I don't have a one sheet. So I'm definitely going and downloading this checklist. I think that's huge. I love it. So like I said, I wrap up every single interview with the same question. Since
Mhm.
the show is called The Growth Now Movement, that question is in your life, what has been your biggest moment of growth?
Wow. So just in life, not necessarily focus on business, in my
Correct.
life. I would have to say it has been some personal failures, right? I've had some personal failures that happened kind of in my mid 20s. In about the space of 15 months, I had some personal losses that one of which I contributed to. And in that season, I learned, and in recovering from that, I learned a lot about myself that now 20 plus years later still impacts me today and has impacted my relationships for the better. And that means the world to me. The people in my life, family, my friends, mean everything to me. And the idea that I am a better person now than I was when maybe they first met me or came to engage with me, I think is really important. It's important to me to be a good part of the relationships I'm in. So I would say it's probably some personal failures that have led to my greatest seasons of growth.
I love it. Aurora, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your wisdom with my audience. And thank you so much for helping people get their message heard. Because I think that that's something that people need to do more in order to change the world for the better. Whether they're teaching people how to sell a widget or teaching people how to live a better life, like it's super important. So thank you so much for taking the helm on that and helping people do that.
Hey, I loved it. I love that we ran into each other at Podfest. It's great to be with you. It's great to see you. I'm super excited for your success, and I'll be cheering for you next week when you're giving your presentation.
Thank you.